Welcome back, everyone, to Vox Markets. My name is Paul Hill. I'm delighted again to be able to speak to CEO Monique, Fayad, and co-founder Marla Dubinsky of Trellis Health, a pioneering, resilience-based telemedicine firm focused on helping patients manage their chronic long-term health conditions. Big congrats on the IPO this morning, raising £28.5 million at 40p. But before we sort of dig into the details, Monique, I don't suppose you could quickly walk us through what Trellis Health, the services are, who are its target customers, and the key therapeutic areas that it addresses.
Sure. So we refer to Trellis Health as a resilience-driven connected health solution. And what that means effectively is that we've taken an approach that's been utilized at the Mount Sinai IBD Center for the last 5 years, an approach and an integrated care methodology that has just had tremendous outcomes in terms of positive health outcomes, but also cost savings. And we've taken that approach and we've built a business that digitizes, operationalizes, and scales that globally. So anyone can have that same level of access to multidisciplinary integrated care without having to go to a physical, academic medical center. So everything we do is enabled through technology to predict and prevent costly, unplanned care and to build resilience in our patients so that they stay healthy and thrive. And we're really all about addressing, both the clinical factors, tracking the clinical factors, but also the behavioral and psychosocial factors that influence healthcare outcomes. And that has become more and more important. And people are realizing that the behaviors are really what are driving our patients' health. So there's 3 key components to our business, which we like to refer to as team, tech, and touch. So, we're far more than an app. Some people think, oh, Trellis is an app. No, we have an app component. But, in terms of the team piece, we actually employ licensed healthcare professionals. So we have a triad of a behavioral health specialist, a psychologist, a dietitian, and then a specialist nurse who work with our patients to predict, to analyze their resilience using the GRIT methodology, and then to put in place personalized care plans to build resilience over a period of time. And we do all of that via telemedicine. So there is a human component to this because you can't just do this purely with an app. You really do need to have the integrated care. We collaborate with the patient's GI gastro provider. So our team doesn't provide any gastro clinical care. We actually provide all the kind of wraparound services that patients need that they currently don't have access to in our traditional care settings. So then all of this is enabled through our HIPAA compliant, highly secure cloud-based infrastructure, which we call Trellis Elevate, that enables us to coordinate with our patients and to do the GRIT resilience assessment and risk stratify them and put their personalized care plans in place and track them over time. So really, again, it's all about operationalizing this methodology and approach that's been used at Sinai and bringing it to the masses.
So it's basically joined up personalized medicine. And what therapeutic areas does it cover?
So right now we're focusing on inflammatory bowel diseases, which is an umbrella term for 2 digestive diseases, which are chronic incurable diseases of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Of course, that's where the methodology and approach have been utilized at the IBD Center at Mount Sinai. But we expect and plan to scale this approach to other disease categories, and our exclusive license from Mount Sinai, and it actually covers 7 broad disease categories. So beyond IBD, but we're starting with IBD and gastro diseases, and then we'll expand beyond that.
Okay, and then Marla, just in terms of the target sort of patients we look after, can you just talk through who you sort of like the service would be best suited to, and also just a bit about the sort of the clinical evidence and of the efficacy of the services?
Sure. So, myself, because I've studied only inflammatory bowel disease, and my co-founder, Lori Kiefer, has learned how to build these resilience type methodology in GI patients. And then most recently in our IBD patients, we noted that almost 50% of IBD patients, and this may apply to other chronic conditions as well, have a comorbid mental health condition that accompanies this chronic physical condition. So you've got this overlap between patients with anxiety, depression, or other mental health diseases that are making this disease even more complicated and impacting their quality of life even more. So the reason why we built sort of this GRIP methodology around patients with IBD is to sort of address both the physical aspects of the disease as well as the mental health. So this is really a quintessential disease whereby addressing both the physical and emotional health is the perfect approach. So that is why with patients with IBD, this approach has been shown to have tremendous cost savings or healthcare utilization savings. That has really been what we did at Sinai, which then took it and scaled it through Trellis. So what we saw is that if you take patients who are deemed high risk, high need because they have a comorbid mental health condition or other things that the health team actually felt puts these patients at risk of costing the system a lot of money, right? This is what we're identifying. We're looking analog version, which patients would do best integrated into this grit or resilience-based method. And what we saw is that in those patients who scored low on resilience, the magic number is 70, by the way, that is the magic number of resiliency.
Yeah.
Those patients who scored less than 70 on a scale of 0 to 100, that is our proprietary grit assessment. Those who scored less than 70 who were actually put into this grit-based or resilience-based behavioral health methodology. If you look at their emergency room visits the year before they entered the program compared to the year after they entered the program, we had a 90% reduction in emergency room utilization by combining gold standard care that I was providing to my patients as the physical component and combining that with what Lori and her team using this resilience-based methodology. And we also reduced hospitalizations by 88% in the year after. So clearly, if you take those high need, high cost patients, which is what Trellis is doing, you deploy a method where you combine the best sort of IBD care that a physician or a provider could have and combine that with this multidisciplinary approach with a focus on behavior change. We're not just saying you have depression, you have anxiety. We are actually measuring a resilience using an assessment and deploying behavioral health tools that change an individual's behavior. And that includes social determinants of health, which we know is one of the largest impacts on someone's health. So that's really what we do is we change disease interfering behaviors and have people thriving.
And how much do these patients typically cost the sort of payers in the States or the health services in general, if they're not part of the grit resilience Trellis system?
Well, and there's been a lot of studies published in the last few years about the cost of these patients. So our healthcare payers who are health plans and employers are very aware. These are costly patients. On average, an IBD patient in the United States is costing around $20,000 a year. So that's across the board. If you layer in a mental health comorbidity or any other, issues such as opioid dependence, overuse of narcotics, anemia, you're going to double that cost. And if there's a hospitalization or surgery, you can potentially triple that cost. So really, it's about, preventing those, any type of unplanned care or surgery in the patient and keeping them healthy and thriving and keeping them out of the hospital. So there's the other thing to understand is that with these IBD patients, this is a disease that's diagnosed very early in life. So it's a lifelong incurable disease diagnosed in the late teens, early 20s. People are living with this and struggling with this throughout their entire lifespan. So the cumulative cost to our payers is tremendous and far exceeds those of other conditions that are diagnosed much later in life and therefore have a much, a lower lifetime cost. So the payers are aware of this. IBD is definitely on their radar and they currently have no way to kind of predict and prevent the care. They can look in their past history on their patients and see what they cost last year, but they don't know who are those people who are very likely to need to use, to have an ED visit or a hospitalization. And the GRIT methodology has been validated to be able to predict that with over 85% accuracy if a patient is assessed as low resilience.
So what are we saying then? Basically, then if I was a payer, the Trellis system could identify which insured people I have are going to be high risk and potentially high dependency by 90%. And then once I actually get into the system, it reduces the hospitalisation and emergencies by effectively 90% as well.
Correct.
So if I'm an insurer, then I'm paying, let's say, for instance, because the person goes into hospital $45,000 a year, we're almost saying that I can almost like say that I'm going to save a large chunk of that, because the hospitalisation trip is actually probably the most expensive, not only on the actual dollar terms, but also it blocks a bed if you've got sort of like, COVID or whatever, isn't it? Sort of like, I'm guessing.
Right. Well, it typically starts in the emergency room, with patients will have, symptoms, and a lot of it is often anxiety driven and not so much the actual, they'll have physical manifestations of abdominal pain. They may not be able to get in touch with their primary doctor, and they'll just go to the emergency room. And that emergency room, unfortunately, is a window straight into the hospital. So, in something like 50% of the cases, these emergency room visits turn into hospitalizations. Yes. Patients stay in a couple days. Because these patients are complex, hospitals have to run many, many tests on them. So it just becomes a very expensive proposition. Yeah. So for us to be able to predict those patients that are going to be potentially high utilizers and managing them closely and keeping them out of hospital, basically by avoiding one emergency room visit, it covers the cost of Trellis Health services. So there's a tremendous return to payers to have our patients under our care management to keep them out of hospital.
Absolutely. And I'm a huge patient benefits as well, because they don't end up in hospital and they're going to spend a couple of weeks in there either. Just Marla, just how big is this market then in inflammatory bowel disease? Let's just take the States, for instance. I know it's huge in the UK, but just look at the States.
Yeah, sure. So there's approximately 3 million people living with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis today. And there's about 70,000 newly diagnosed cases annually. So that means there are 70,000 new patients who could benefit from Trellis every year, as an example. And the point of where we really work best is, as Monique noted, we want to prevent and risk mitigate. So if you can imagine someone at the time of diagnosis, and you could take both their physical attributes that predict a patient may need surgery and prevent that, and then add a layer of preventing patients from developing anxiety and depression, because we want to be ahead of that. And we know that patients with low resilience have a high risk of developing anxiety and depression. So imagine you're a newly diagnosed patient and we're able to sort of teleport in no matter where you are receiving your care, be able to stratify you into someone who needs higher level care, sort of like this laser focused, tight control care for both your behavior as well as your disease control. And really focus. We know the higher the need the patient, the tighter Trellis contains the cost, because the tighter control we have on the patient. So our goal is to take those that most need us and be able to move them into a less costly space where they actually aren't relying on low value care. We're providing the highest value care to the members and to any employee, for example, when Trellis is actually deployed to the IBD population.
Yeah, and isn't just presumably just saving the hospitalisation and emergency department costs, because there are patients. I mean, I suffer from Crohn's, and I now do not have to take Humira simply because of the resilience, which is the principles from Trellis Health. So it's self-efficacy and a lot of discipline. So essentially, on Humira, just for our investors, is probably £10,000 at least a year just per patient in the UK, and probably more in the States. It isn't just hospitalizations; it's also drugs and safety for the patient if they haven't got to take expensive drugs either, I guess.
Right, but it's more. Oh, go ahead, Marla.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say that the truth be told is it's more about ensuring that the right patient is receiving the right therapy at the right time. You are right. People sometimes use therapies mistaking ongoing symptoms for active IBD when it's actually this functional abdominal pain, what we call irritable bowel, layered onto an underlying IBD, and people get confused and overmanage. So probably more where Trellis really will help is actually ensuring that the patient is receiving appropriate therapy when they most need it and not over treatment or under treatment, because what we actually do is elevate the standard of care so that everybody, no matter where you live, gets the same level of IBD care, whether you're seeing at the IBD Center in Mount Sinai, which is where Crohn's was first discovered in the 30s, or whether you live very far away from Manhattan, you will receive that really high level care. So we're going to be elevating the quality of care they get using gold standard algorithmic approaches to who needs what, and be able to wrap around on the behavioral health side. So I think we're going to optimize the way patients are managed and ensure that someone who does need adalimumab or Humira is getting it instead of over managing, you know.
Okay, well, you've convinced me on the product, that's for sure, on the service. Now, Monique, just on the go-to-market strategy, and also sort of like, are there any FDA or regulatory approvals required?
Well, currently, because we are really a care delivery solution, we're not a therapeutic or a drug or a device. We don't fall under the FDA regulatory approval process. So there are some regulations around software as a medical device, but again, we're not prescribing something to someone. We're actually managing their care, and we're using a methodology to assess them and then bring them to a point of resilience. So because most of what we do is behavioral in nature, is not, actually clinical. Again, we do have licensed healthcare professionals, but we aren't providing any of that clinical care in terms of diagnosis or prescribing or anything like that. So we do not fall under FDA regulatory. Therefore, we expect, and we are in discussions right now with healthcare plans in the New York State and two national plans to have patients under management before the end of this year. So we can achieve revenue much quicker than a drug or a device could, because we don't have to go through all of those, years of trials and validation.
And do you need any advertising or marketing at the front end, or is it basically because you're using the payers, these guys, and therefore it's a B2B type of sale rather than anything B2C?
Correct. It's a direct B2B sale to the employers and payers. And we know that, the people within these organizations who focus on innovation, value-based care, we have relationships with them, and our salespeople have, relationships over many years selling into health plans and employers. So we're speaking with people at the top levels, chief medical officers, heads of innovation, who understand that they're trying to do population health management and effectively control the costs of these high cost patients. So we do primarily direct sales into these organizations.
Yeah, and is the IP at all, Marla, patented or protected somehow?
Yes, so the GRIT methodology, as well as our methodology to stratify patients into those that are high need, high cost patients, and that is all part of the IP that we've licensed exclusively from Mount Sinai. We have a provisional patent application, and then now applying for a non-provisional patent.
Right. Okay. Good. Yeah. And the first patient, you said, Monique, is going to be sort of in the second half, I guess, because we're nearly there now. Yeah. What sort of price points are you looking at?
Yeah, so our business model is based on a one-time screening fee. So we would screen as many people in the population as we could, because again, we're trying to identify those at high cost, high need, and that are at risk for low resilience. And then when those people are screened, if they engage in our program, actively go through our program, we would charge a $300 per engaged member per month fee. That's an average cost, again, based on our assumptions that may be higher, maybe lower, depending on our negotiations with payers. Yeah. So that turns into a $3,600 annual recurring revenue stream for us.
And how much money would you save for a payer if they were going to pay you sort of $3,600 a year?
Yeah, so our goal is to save them at least 20% per year on these patients. And again, by keeping them out of the hospital, as we've seen with the tremendous results from the GRIT methodology at Mount Sinai, those outcomes in terms of reductions in unplanned care. So we think we can definitely achieve and surpass the 20%. That's what we're negotiating. We want to not over promise. We want to promise and over deliver. And so we expect that we'll get at least the 20% savings. And again, when you assume that these patients are costing around $20,000 and up per year, that's a significant savings for the payer, and they realize all the savings on top of our direct program costs.
Well, just one hospitalization will cost literally thousands, wouldn't it? So if you've identified on a level of accuracy, 90% accuracy of the people actually coming into who are going to be subscribers, because they're, you know, high need and you know, low resilience. And then you've effectively, with 90% reduction in their hospitalisation and emergency care, it's a pretty sure bet if you're an insurer, isn't it, that you're going to save them, you know, a lot of money, I guess.
And one thing we do on top of the prediction and with the management is we also, with our technology, are constantly doing remote patient monitoring. So we are monitoring patients' clinical markers of disease inflammation, as well as their patient-reported outcomes and symptoms around anxiety, depression, pain, number of stools per day, things like that. So our system tracks that, and to determine any indicators of rising risk. So if we see that, we have dashboards that alert us and our care team and their gastro provider that there could be something going on with that patient that could trigger an unplanned care event. So again, it's that active monitoring and prevention that we're delivering, which is really, you know, powerful to our clients.
And that's a really competitive advantage, because that gives you ongoing data that helps you improve the efficacy, presumably, of the product and the service as the patient stays in. Because just from my own experience, I mean, essentially your body changes, and it can have your immune system attacks on different vectors at different times in your life, and they increase. And unfortunately, what happens is after 2 or 3 years, problems that you didn't have before come up again. And being able to see that with your system, presumably, then gives you that best practice and gives you that blueprint to put some AI or some pattern recognition to be able to predict ahead of these things happening, doesn't it? And that gives you a real competitive advantage, presumably.
Absolutely. So we're building within our technology, you know, AI, predictive analytics to basically help us better predict if a patient is going to flare, you know, looking at different clinical markers and patient-reported outcomes. And underneath all of this, as we're managing all of these patients, we'll be building this rich longitudinal database of information that will become very valuable unto itself. We look to actually, through the proceeds of our funding, bring in additional initial data that we can track, such as wearables data and genetic data, because again, IBD, there are a lot of different causes of it. So there's not one specific thing that's driving it. And so therefore we can monitor what's going on genetically, physically, behaviorally, and then from a symptoms perspective. And that becomes very helpful over time. Those insights actually over time become very, very valuable to industry because they can understand why patients are responding a certain way to a certain therapy, or why they're sequencing therapies in a certain way. So we do expect that we'll have additional revenue streams coming from the data that we're developing on our patients. Again, anonymized data. It's just insights about what's happening with this population to industry and pharma.
I think genomic sequencing is just going to be a game changer in terms of the whole IBS. So I do hope you managed to solve that one. Now, Marla, just in terms of the competition, is there anybody out sort of like selling this type of product at all that is anywhere near? I've seen sort of got Teledoc, who do a one-size-fit-all type of approach. It's very low value, but they don't sort of like do a vertical deep dive on it. That's my sort of like layman's view of it. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. You know, it's a platform for which you can integrate some behavioral health services, monitor, for example, hemoglobin A1C for a diabetic, you know, they have glucose strips. You know, you can monitor using devices, a little bit different from what we're doing in terms of monitoring. We're monitoring biomarkers, but that's something that's part of gold standard of care. We're not, you know, a device company, as Monique noted. We're not sending devices out to individuals to monitor their blood sugar, or we're not sort of hooking patients up with maybe a psychiatrist. We're really developing and have developed behavioral health models and modules that are customized specifically to one's resilience. There is no one out there that is screening patients for their resilience, being able to predict who's going to be a high cost, high need utilizer, being able to predict who's going to have a mental health comorbidity and be able to deploy personalized care plans on day one. That is not out there. So this is a very unique offering. And as Monique noted, our ability to have all of this data, we're going to get better and better at being more predictive, because we're going to be able to be a more robust predictor using predictive informatics to be able to actually analyze where our predictions are going. And so our value will keep continuing to go up because of the data that we're gathering. Yes.
Yeah. And Monique, in terms of the sort of the strategy, obviously we're looking at the US at the start, but there's lots of other places around the world where it's needed. For the UK, for instance, for the NHS. What's the sort of, is there an international angle to this one as well?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this is definitely not an approach that is just going to be useful in the United States. And we definitely have plans to expand, globally, starting in the UK and then also Canada. And, these IBD is everywhere now. It's not just a westernized disease and westernized industrialized cultures. It's spreading to emerging countries and other areas. So as that continues, we do believe this approach can be utilized there. We are in discussions already, preliminary discussions with senior people at NICE and NIH and NHS. Actually, NHS Digital is very interested in speaking to us further about how Trellis can plug in to help accelerate their digital transformation vision. And not just for IBD. I think, again, while we're starting out in IBD, this approach of identifying resilience and disease interfering behaviors applies to any chronic condition. So we're looking at adapting it beyond IBD into these other disease categories and using this our GRIT resilience assessment, which only a very small part of GRIT is actually specific to the disease. As Marla said, most of it has to do with social determinants of health and psychological approaches to disease acceptance and optimism, issues like that. So it's a very intriguing model. Again, it'll be very different to operationalize it in the UK because the systems are different over there. The reimbursement is different, but we do have a dedicated R&D track already budgeted for that to use out of the proceeds of our IPO.
And what other therapeutic areas, just quickly, could you potentially utilize it for, the service? Yeah,
currently we're licensed from Mount Sinai to cover large therapeutic areas such as diabetes, chronic kidney disease, heart disease, oncology, all the autoimmune disorders, cystic fibrosis. And to be honest, since we are the only company that is commercializing this approach for Mount Sinai, if there is another area that we are interested in that our payers would like us to go into that's outside of the scope, we can go back to Mount Sinai and approach them about adding that to our license. So I'm sure they've been very amenable to work with us to make this successful.
Well, I mean, your addressable market's going to be huge, isn't it? No doubt about it. So just Marla, I sort of cast my eye over your advisory board, the scientific advisory board. It seems to be like a who's who of people in the industry. Can you just comment on this one? Because it's a massive endorsement for the company's technology that you've managed to attract such sort of like acknowledged experts across the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a testament to taking something that was born out of a highly academic, deep scientific methodology for you to be able to have global leaders around the world, really, who are leaders in the field of inflammatory bowel disease, but also chronic diseases, also resilience, positive psychology. And that means that they believe that our results and the data we have based on what we've done at Mount Sinai is something that they believe in and have faith will be able to be applied not just in the US, as Monique said, but globally. So I think this is really, as you noted, a testament to how deep our science is. And I do want to add, Paul, that, a lot of point solutions, which are apps that sort of have you just go there, there's no human touch to it where you're sort of on your own. And if you don't succeed, try again. There's no really integration of holding someone's hand. And I think that's why we built this to be very unique, where you do have your own care team that is assigned to you and to get you to graduate and really walk you through. So I think that is also a very unique aspect. And all of our colleagues that are on the the SAB recognize the problems of the healthcare system, recognize no matter where you are, whether it's US or UK, that no one has access to these multidisciplinary services that we are providing to them and their patients. And they recognize how much this is going to change the lives of individuals with chronic conditions. And the US spends over $3 trillion on chronic conditions and mental health. Some people have more than one chronic condition. So this is when you talk about an addressable market, you're right. We're not just talking about IBD. We are starting in IBD, and then we're going to proceed forward.
Yeah, I mean, from my own personal experience, it's personalised medicine that's required here. One size fit all, it just isn't going to happen. Now, Monique, putting all this together, if we're hitting a price point around about sort of like $3,600, what's sort of your target market share, say, in 5 years' time?
Well, we've been very conservative in estimating where we're going to be in 5 years' time. And I know that Marla would like to see us getting a much larger share of the market. But even if we get a 1% share, so if you're looking at about 30,000 or so patients by the end of year 4, well, that only represents...
That's over 100,000. That's over 100,000. Sorry, 100 million, isn't it? Over 100 million revenues annualized.
On an annualized basis, just for IBD, just in the US. So that alone is a very compelling, attractive recurring revenue stream, which at scale will have very high margin. So again, that's the beauty of this as well, is we're utilizing this care team of 3 people per 1,000 patients. So there's not a tremendous dependence on a lot of people to scale this approach. Again, this is all based on the experience of volume of patients that they've been able to manage at the IBD center at Mount Sinai. So, and again, as we develop our technology to automate things better, we can lessen the dependence on humans. I don't think we'll ever take the human out of the equation, because you need to have that touch approach and that someone there to reach out to, especially with these diseases that are highly isolating. But a lot of the interaction after they reach resilience and we're maintaining them will be primarily all via technology interactions.
Yeah, well, I mean, just sort of valuation perspective for investors, this is sort of hypothetical, but if you hit sort of like, just for argument's sake, $100 million turnover on a 30% EBITDA, which would be modest for this type of telemedicine business, but that would be 30 million of EBITDA times a 15 times multiple, sort of like in 5 years' time, which again would be modest for a high recurring, profitable, cash generative business. That would give you $450 million, which then sort of, if you adjust for your sterling, I think would give you a share price of roughly around just under £2, £1.90 per share, compared to your listed price today of 40p. So there's good upside. And also, I would just point investors, if you want to see a movie of this one, which has gone out before, a spin out from Mount Sinai and from the EKF, have a look at Renalytics, or Renalytics, I think it's called. Sorry about that. It's Renalytics. Because I think that's now valued at 1.5 billion. So
and they're currently dually traded on the NASDAQ as well. So it's hopefully we can get there. Definitely, if we achieve revenues of $100 million a year, we'll be qualified to trade on the NASDAQ. So we'll look at that in a few years when we've achieved our milestones of those patient volumes. Yeah,
and then just finally, Monique, just going forward in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, what sort of key milestones should investors sort of think about for the business? Obviously, kicking off commercialization, getting your first customers and stuff.
Right. Securing these contracts for our initial projects. Again, we're in discussions with payers, local payers in the New York area to do local demonstration programs. Once those programs prove themselves over the next 6 to 12 months, these contracts will turn into longer term, corporate contracts and enterprise contracts and national contracts with the payers. The biggest volumes of patients are going to come through the insurance companies who cover, millions and millions of patients. So, as we see those contracts scale and grow, and we also get the data from our patient outcomes that we're expecting based on what we've seen at Mount Sinai, we'll be publishing that in scientific journals to again promote the effectiveness of this approach. So there'll be a lot of announcements in terms of milestones of our contracts, our getting patients under management, operationalizing our business, and then realizing the outcomes, the health outcomes that we expect to attain.
Well, it does seem like a game-changing service, not only for patients but also for the healthcare services. And if you can, the money's one thing, obviously saving it, but improving the quality of life for patients is just as important, and freeing up valuable resource in emergency departments and hospitals around the world, and particularly say in the States and stuff, as we go into the next stage potentially of COVID. So I wish you all the best. So thanks very much, ladies. Excellent to touch base again. And if any investor wants to follow Trellis at all, please just click on the button on the website. You'll get all the news flow and all the commentary automatically to your inbox. And then finally, I've got a real treat for investors, because we're going to play. This is particularly if you're a fan of Strictly Come Dancing, because we're going to play a 2-minute video from Amy Downen, who actually suffers and has done of Crohn's the whole of her life. But she had a long period before she was diagnosed. Anyway, she talks about her condition, her personal situation, and also the Trellis Health Services. So it's worth watching. So thanks again, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Amy Dowden, and I'm mostly known for being a professional dancer on one of the biggest TV shows in the UK, BBC's Strictly Come Dancing, known worldwide as Dancing with the Stars. I'm also a former British champion, and looking back at my teenage years, I would have never believed that I would have become so far. When I was 11 years old, I started having severe stomach problems. After 8 years of gruesome hospital stays, many symptoms, I was finally diagnosed at the age of 19 after a 6-week hospital stay with Crohn's disease. Most people don't realise that stress is one of the most common factors to cause a Crohn's or colitis flare-up. And Trellis Health has got this amazing programme to help with your anxiety, your stress, your energy levels, all in which can help prevent one of those awful flare-ups. I truly wish I had Trellis Health growing up and in my teenage years. I think it definitely would have prevented so many hospital stays, so much pain that I went through, and even for what my family had to experience as well. You know, they provide support and help with so much more than just living with a chronic illness. People just see the pain, but they don't know the mental side as well. And Trellis helps with your diet tracking, your mental health, your anxiety levels, your fatigue, tracking your medication and your progress. And I really feel it's such a useful source for anybody suffering with Crohn's and colitis. And who knows, I might have become, you know, maybe achieve my success earlier than I did, because obviously many opportunities were taken away from me because of my hospital stays, the pain I was in, and also looking back and seeing what this did for my family as well.